Hello, welcome to another episode of Data in the Hallway. My name is Ray Paik. I'm TiDB Community Manager, joined by my colleague Daniel Van Eden, joining us from the Netherlands as usual. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Shannon Dosemagen, who is a senior fellow at the Open Environmental Data Project. And I got a chance to see Shannon's presentation a couple of months ago as we were recording this in Denver at the Open Source Summit. Shannon, you delivered a speech on some presentation and some of the work you've done in the climate and environmental research work. So it was pretty fascinating. I think I mentioned this in the past, one of the episodes. We have a couple of people from Adelaide Planetarium to talk about the Zooniverse projects and the topic of citizen science. Like always been fascinated by open collaboration outside of code. So it's great to have you. And I'll post a link to your presentation from the Open Source Summit too. Like it's I think a 10-15 minute keynote that you delivered. I think a lot of people will find it interesting, especially if you're interested in climate and the environment. So I'll stop talking, but I'll let you, like Shannon, introduce yourself. I mean, tell us a little bit about not just about you, but Open Environmental Data Project and some of the other projects that you talked about during your presentation, like Public Lab. And I think you're still involved in the Open Science Hardware Foundation, if I remember correctly. So tell us about your work and we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's
Yeah.
a pleasure to, I guess, continue the conversation since this
Yeah.
is a bit of a follow-on. Um, I can be long-winded on this. It's a bit of a trajectory, so tell me if you need me to cut it short. But I guess I've always been really interested in creating spaces for people to come together and build, collaborative environments. My passion is really around doing that to address environmental and climate issues. But I've certainly, worked in a number of different spaces, doing those kind of, collaborative endeavors. But maybe, taking it back and connecting the dots a bit with your guest who spoke about citizen science. One of the first projects that I was involved in was Public Lab, which I co-founded with, I think it was there were six of us, so five other people, back in 2010. And, we were inspired by the idea of citizen science and that it was, a way for people to become involved, in scientific endeavors and working alongside scientists who were asking, the questions that were driving them. But it was, citizen science was happening in parallel with some of the kind of early organization of the internet and the ability for people to participate in digital formats. And so there was a lot of interest in concepts such as civic science and civic media and OpenGov and Gov 2.0. So much more, direct and participatory involvement of people rather than, just being about like scientists asking a question and people providing data. And so Public Lab was in response to that moment, I think. And we incorporated a whole number of kind of hypotheses and theories about what was possible when you started to equip people with the tools to do their own environmental monitoring. And the very first project that we worked on together was the 2010 BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And I think it's just exemplary of the types of tools and technologies outside of software that we were meshing together to start thinking about how science could be more accessible. So we were flying balloons and kites, like massive. I mean, if you can imagine, 5.5 foot bright red balloons, and we were sending them up thousands of feet above the Gulf, and doing that with a ton of different people who were students and fisher people, like folks that wanted to understand what was happening directly in their environment, folks who were coming from afar, to help out in any way they could because it was such a, visible disaster. And we were capturing images. So I think we captured something like a couple 100,000 images, created maps that helped to tell a different story and perspective than what was being released by BP and the contractors that they were working with. So that kind of philosophy of, taking physical scientific tools, tools that could capture data that were open source, and then the software that we were using to do the data analysis and and the sense making of the data, um, paired with regular folks, scientists, social scientists, teachers, technologists, anybody that really wanted to get involved, meshing that together. We built Public Lab as an open environmental research community, and then supported people around the world that were, taking that ethos and doing their own projects. I would say probably like 5 years in, so about 2015, a number of us got really interested, and this was outside of Public Lab. Inside Public Lab as well, but a number of us got really interested in, what's the future of open scientific hardware going to be? And so we launched an event series called The Gathering for Open Science Hardware, which is an amazing, thriving community even today. I really encourage people, and I will encourage people later to take a look at it. But the idea was like, let's focus a bit on the scientific tools, and get the people building together and communicating across, borders, because the physical tools, the open tools of science can be very complicated to connect when you're not in proximity or working in a digital space together. So really wanted to solve some of the challenges there. Um, that eventually, has helped us to see some of the institutional barriers as well. So GOSH is the really, kind of community-centric part of open science hardware. But then we started the Open Science Hardware Foundation, and that is meant to address, those institutional barriers, policies that surround tools, the broader incorporation of open science hardware into open science more broadly, or science more broadly. So we have a lot of work that's ongoing and has been going on for the past decade, which is really awesome to see. So that was one of my passions that kind of like sat in between Public Lab and the Open Environmental Data Project. But I became a fellow with the Shuttleworth Foundation in, I want to say 2020. And they graciously supported me in starting OEDP, Open Environmental Data Project. And really the idea came out of some of the gaps that I saw in Public Lab. Tools are available. The landscape of open source hardware and software is booming, but really we weren't doing enough to address questions around data stewardship, data governance. So who controls data that's being produced? Who benefits? How can we better, move data from communities into places where decision making is happening? How do we better, use the data that's already available, and do, more sense making of it? Um, and so in OEDP, what we started doing, and this was back in 2020, was convening diverse groups, frontline community members, policymakers, technologists, academics, to really start to rethink environmental infrastructure, and what that looks like as a shared, kind of public utility for people. So we've had a number of different projects that have interrogated those, kind of problems that I was identifying. And we continue to do so under new leadership. So I was the ED until the end of 2024, and now I'm doing research with the organization. But yeah, maybe I'll stop there and we can, go on to the next part.
Yeah, no, no, that's great. Yeah, I found all those, I mean, including OEDP today. Like, I found all the projects that you were involved in, like, pretty fascinating. And I mean, if people watch the presentation from Open Source Summit, I mean, I think you had photos of like a different hardware that people were using. I mean, a couple of things that I was impressed with. I mean, obviously, like a large balloons and kites. I mean, these aren't like a trivial items, but a lot of different people contributed to it. So I think it made,
Lot. Yeah.
to a certain extent, science pretty accessible. Like you don't have to have a PhD in mechanical engineering or whatever it is, or aeronautical engineering to participate. You brought it all in, and this was like all like, I mean, mostly like do it yourself. Like people came
Mhm.
together and built things, and it's not like you ordered it from like large, engineering companies or any of that. So that really reminded me of like a citizen science. Like you don't need to have like a deep expertise in different scientific fields to participate and collaborate. So, I thought that was cool. And then obviously you're bringing a lot of different. You alluded to this, like open source software, open hardware, and scientists together. So that collaboration was, yeah, was definitely interesting. And I think you mentioned like a couple of challenges and barriers, which hopefully we'll get to in a minute. Um, uh, so this might be a like I don't know if this is a dumb question. Like I think I mentioned like three buckets, like open science, open data, and open source software. I mean, those are sort of the three, groupings of things that are involved in some of your work in the climate environment. I mean, I don't know if that's sort of right way to sort of group things, but I wanted to ask you what the roles of different areas are. I mean, being very simplistic, and having more of a background in open source software, it feels like open source software is something like a software that you can use as part of your research or various work you're doing. But I mean, maybe you can educate us on whether I'm being too simplistic, or if it goes beyond that for open source software, but other things too, like data and other things. So,
Yeah. I would never say you're being too
yeah,
simplistic.
yeah,
Maybe I'll just expand a bit
hmm
though.
yeah,
We just finished a year-long research project that looked at the role of openness more broadly and its, usefulness to frontline communities and others that are doing environmental research. And I guess I would say that I tend to take a more political stance on what open is. And so not, I don't think about it just in terms of it's a license applied to X thing, but also, I think about the role that it can play ultimately in, creating accessibility and making sure that things are transparent and that they don't get locked away for communities. And so I would just I think especially in the environmental and climate space, say that those parts are, of utmost importance, rather than just like the creation and production of environmental data sets or open environmental data sets, for instance. So I'm happy to expand on that a bit if that's of interest, but maybe that was just,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No, that'd be great, actually. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, again, I think that we become in the work that we're doing much more accountable, and that can be accountable to frontline communities. It can be accountable to each other in our collaborations when we are thinking about open approaches to the work that we're doing. Because really, in the transparency that gets created ultimately is where trust begins to bloom. When you're out doing work in a community setting, and in the environmental space and other spaces, relationship and trust building is just 100% the foundation of everything. You can't do projects and you can't engage in long-term collaborations or partnerships without that kind of critical foundation. And I do think that openness and just the underlying philosophy helps us to establish that foundation. So that's really important. Um, I also would say I've thought a lot about how, climate change, environmental pollution doesn't respect, the physical boundaries that we have in the world. It doesn't look at a map and say, like, I'm going to just stay in this one county or, within this one state, for instance. And so the application of openness also allows us to do local, but then think as a global community, and it gives us the opportunity to build upon the work of others. Takes time away from duplicating research that's been done. So in addition, open science is inclusive of things such as open access and open publishing, but I would just highlight those as well. It's really critical that research that people are doing are held under, these kind of open philosophies so that we can do more and do it faster because we are, in such a critical place in addressing pollution and climate change. Um, I think from a, community perspective, the application of open can help people to advocate in new and different ways. So I would always say that like I don't think environmental data in and of itself is the thing that solves a problem. But the use of openness, the transparency that it can provide, will always help us to do more around sense making, and to understanding data in a way that can ultimately lead to better advocacy strategies. I also, but have been doing a lot of work, as has OADP, thinking about, what environmental infrastructure looks like when it is designed as a public utility. So, especially in the current political moment that we're in, we're seeing a lot of federal withdrawal from science, federal withdrawal from the enormous amount of work that's been done towards environmental justice and climate justice over the last few years. And it really, has made me think, and I was thinking about this in the first Trump administration, what are we doing shoring up our resources, primarily in federal government? Like, let's start thinking about how we can create, these decentralized but really coordinated efforts towards environmental infrastructure, thinking about these as a public good. So really a commons of environmental research. And the tenets of the tenets of openness, help us to get at those ideas.
Yeah, so maybe a question for me, like you were talking earlier about BP, and of course, it's not like a company that's going likely to be working with you, but being more open and transparent, does it allow you to work with some like other companies that might be interested in helping you or maybe using what you're producing?
Yeah, certainly. In the public lab days, especially, we had, we just decided we would not work with extractive industry. So we wouldn't work with mining companies or directly with oil companies. But that certainly doesn't mean that that information isn't accessible. And there have been or a number of other, corporations that have been interested in data that's produced, not so much during the BP oil spill, but certainly, in other scenarios that could be useful. So, I'm very cautious about working with industry, but I definitely think that, a whole full hands-on approach to addressing climate and environment is absolutely necessary, and that includes private industry.
Yeah, I think you may have mentioned this in your presentation too, and please correct me if I'm misremembering things. I mean, beyond like large industries, like we talked about, like BP's of the world, I mean, this had like direct impact on other industries like fishing
Yeah.
or even local farmers, right? So, I mean, they're very invested in the health of the environment in Gulf of Mexico near New Orleans and even further away. So yeah, I would definitely think there are like maybe these aren't Fortune 500 type of companies that we think about, but this impacts a lot of people and a lot of different industries that we tend to neglect, I think.
Yeah. And there's really interesting projects that are also in those sectors. I would point to my colleagues who have a project called Open Team. And that is one that's looking at climate monitoring around agriculture more broadly. At least previously, they were partnered with and supported by the USDA. And I think that's just an excellent place or a project for people to look at and be interested in if they're thinking about climate resilience in the agricultural sector. The fishing industry is under a whole different set of regulations, and there's people that are doing a ton of interesting work. My colleague Kate Wing at Intertidal agency has thought about the commons of data production in the ocean space and especially around fisheries. And she does just a tremendous job pulling together people in that sector as well. So there is so much interesting work happening, but it's usually in these little pockets,
Mhm.
that then get expanded into broader, institutional contexts or policy. But really excellent opportunities for companies to get involved as well.
Cool. Excellent. Yeah, so I think I mentioned this a little earlier. I mean, one of the things that you didn't have time to sort of expand on this in your presentation in Denver, are some of the challenges that you see. And I mean, this is like based on my rough notes here, listening to your presentation. So you can expand on these too. I mean, one was making open data more usable. So I don't know if that you meant like I think you briefly touched on this. So I wasn't sure if that you like whether this is like accessibility or maybe even data hygiene issue. And the other one, I mean, you sort of alluded to this too, like better working relationship across like a science and different communities. So if you want to like expand on either of those, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of making data usable, I certainly think about this for community collected data because it is very, very hard to use data from communities in regulatory decisions and enforcement decisions. I talk about like this kind of snowball effect that, the best way to use community data when you're thinking about regulation and enforcement is maybe it's the like starting point to get something else done. But I'm very interested in, we have government data sets that are open. And I would assume that you all know this, from working in software, but open does not necessarily mean accessible. And so sometimes these data sets can be, buried in just like really hard to use formats. They don't have any context. The data that you have to piece together to make environmental decisions is fragmented across, different political bodies or, even within nonprofits or whatnot. And so to then be able to act on data becomes so much more difficult. I would say like one of the major challenges that we have in this broader space is like the need for thinking about further standardization, how we translate like a raw data set into plain language that people can actually understand and find useful for the things that they are concerned about. And then focusing more time and energy on the infrastructure to put meaning into data and put meaning behind data. So, whether that is tools for storytelling or map making or, just doing basic analysis. I wish that we would spend more time on that as a space, and I'm hoping that we're moving in that direction. And the second point that you brought up is better working relationships between sectors. I think everybody has their different way of doing things. They have different methods. There's sometimes are mismatched expectations or priorities that people have. There's always uneven power dynamics. That's just a given. But there's a lot that we can do about it. And I really in my work try to push the idea that we can all be knowledge brokers. Just because one person has a paper PhD does not mean that we should minimize the knowledge that someone who has lived or fished in the same body of water over decades, that their knowledge is not, as truthful, right?
Mhm.
So, thinking about what we can do to create longer term, trust in our relationships, really considering the co-creation of research questions around data. So not just, kind of top down, but really like as a collaborative endeavor. And thinking about truly equal partnerships, in which we are collaborators and not beholden to one person or another, or just seen as, end users in a process. I think those are really important, components of everything.
No, I mean, appreciate the context. And I don't know if this is good or bad. Some of the things that you mentioned are challenges that we see in corporate environments too.
Yeah, yeah,
Like Daniel, you probably deal with this more than anyone and TiDB, like just having a dump of data and there's no context, right? Or we don't know what this
yeah,
is. And
Yes,
uh, so,
that happens everywhere.
yeah.
right. So cool. All right. Well, yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, glad I got a chance to talk to you on a podcast. So I wasn't able to obviously ask you follow-up questions in Denver, but
Great.
this is great. So, yeah, and then the next like a topic I had on my list, I don't I think you covered some of this. I wanted to ask you if there are other projects that you may not be directly involved in
Mhm.
that you sometimes pay attention to and you want to bring to attention. And you mentioned some of the work in the agricultural sector, but if there are other projects that maybe people can look at, for general know-how, or maybe they're even interested in contributing, or like financially or otherwise. Like
Yeah.
if there are other projects you want to highlight, that would be great.
Yeah. I mean, I have a very strong passion for open science hardware, and I think it is a place that has tremendous growth potential and opportunity. And we want to keep learning from folks that are coming from software. And I think it's a really exciting space, like to think about, what can translate from open software into the open hardware context. So I would encourage folks to check out the Gathering for Open Science Hardware, or GOSH community. Happy to provide URL later on if you want. In the environmental space, I just love there are two people working on a project called Open Weather. I mentioned this in my keynote, but they're just doing incredible network building of like, looking at weather satellites and, crowdsourcing some of that information. It's just incredible. I think they have lots of opportunities for people to become involved. And then, if you are interested right now in terms of what is happening in the current federal U.S. administration, OEDP is partnered with a number of other organizations and a coalition called the Public Environmental Data Partners. So they're doing a lot of work around archiving environmental and climate data sets and websites and tools for data before they are taken down by the federal government. And if you're, interested beyond the domain of environment and climate, there is a broader list of places where you can get involved as well on the Data Rescues Project website. So, I think it really depends on what you're interested in. But yeah, my hope in the environmental space is there's going to be a lot of more coordinated efforts around what environmental and climate infrastructure is going to look like in the next several years. So really an exciting place to spend some voluntary time.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, happy to. I think I did run across the website for Gosh, so happy
Cool.
to include that URL. And if there are others like the Data Rescues Project, that sounds interesting as well. Like, happy to include it in the episode descriptions.
Great.
So cool. Yeah, thanks for answering all my questions. I mean, Daniel, I don't know if you had other questions you wanted to ask. Uh,
No, I didn't have any
no.
more questions.
All right, cool. So I think it's time for our closing trivia. And Shannon, I don't know if I mentioned this, you're based in New Orleans. It's one of the few places around the world. I mean, we just had a guest from like Las Vegas a few episodes ago. Like, even if you haven't been there, people have some sort of an impression of a place because
Yeah.
of pop culture or what they see in movies or read in books. So, I mean, tell us something about New Orleans that people may not be familiar with, or maybe they'll be surprising to a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, tomorrow is the 20th anniversary of Katrina. So
Oh,
kind of on a more serious note, I do
right.
want to say that, something people may not realize about New Orleans,
Hmm.
is that our population decreased by over half in the storm's
Right.
aftermath. But despite this, we've continued to rebuild and rethink because it's still home for a lot of people.
Hmm.
And like you just mentioned, it is a globally singular place. So, I could gush about people and culture and food, but maybe like a more quirky answer to your trivia question is after Katrina, the feral chicken population in our city boomed. And it came from like, chickens eating backyard coops
Huh.
escaped during the flooding, and they've just, kind of continued. So it's like a very densely urban city. And my own block in the Bywater neighborhood, we have like 10 to 20 chickens and roosters and like baby chickens roaming around at any time. And I'm not really a fan, but we even
Hmm.
have one that lives alongside our feral cat population underneath my house, which I've kind of come to like love unless he starts crowing at 5 o'clock in the morning. So there is your quirky piece of information about New Orleans.
Oh, wow. Like feral
Yeah.
Wow.
chicken population. I didn't expect that. So, I mean, along with cats, that's got to be interesting.
Oh
Like,
yeah, it's a
yeah.
it's a conundrum.
Right. Cool. Well, thanks for, yeah, I mean, I definitely don't think if you're not a local, you would have known that. So,
Nope.
and I mean, obviously it's kind of a sad anniversary, but
Yeah.
like interesting tidbit too. And yeah, and then I've only been there for work. I mean, it was for like an employee gathering, so we had like a plenty of social time. So I did get to sample the city, and yeah, it's a wonderful city. And like you
Yeah.
said, people, food, and culture is it's just amazing.
Yeah.
It's pretty singular place in the United States, I think. So
We've experienced a lot of loss, but we've endured
yeah,
and we still celebrate.
yeah,
We do a good job of that.
cool. All right, well, thank you, Shannon. Appreciate your time. Hopefully, our paths will cross again, and hopefully, I get a chance to like meet you in person. So,
Great. Thank you so
all right,
much. See you.
all right, thank you.
Thank you.